Good afternoon and welcome to More Tea Minister. My name is Ian. Today we're going to be looking at a Taiwanese oolong. We're going to be looking at a tea called Baozhong, and this particular example is from the vendor Wat Cha. Now Baozhong has a very interesting history and heritage both in Taiwan and further back, with some of the processing methods having roots in China. The word Baozhong means wrapped kind, and sometimes it's transliterated as Pushong into English, and that harks back to a historical means of manufacturing and processing the tea, which involved wrapping it in paper. Nowadays, Baozhong, instead of referring to that specific aspect of its manufacture, tends to relate to a tea that has two characteristics. First of all, it's a very, very low oxidation, even amongst the green oolongs. It's traditionally somewhere between 8 to 20% oxidation, often hovering somewhere around 15. And the second distinctive characteristic of Baozhong is that the leaves are not rolled into the beads that we've been very familiar with in these videos. Instead, they're lightly twisted, and that's all part of preserving the gentle flavors that you're going to get from such a low oxidized oolong. Now, just jump ahead of ourselves. In the second part of this video, we're going to look at some of the tea leaves, but just to give you a heads up about what I mean about the way the leaves are finely processed. This packaging here is for 50 grams of the Baozhong, and if I hold up a packet of 75 grams of oolong that's rolled, you can see that the Baozhong packaging is quite a bit bigger, which shows you that the leaves are taking up a lot more room. And in part, that's because there's a lot more given here. You couldn't vacuum pack this very hard because you would crush the leaves. Now, just one or two more details, because I'd like to try and get this video done without taking up too much of your time. One other thing about this tea, well, two things. First of all, it's from this year, 2025. It's a spring harvest in April. It hails from Mingjian, so that's your two things, and I realize I now need three. And the third is that this is from the Four Seasons Cultivar. The reason that's worth mentioning is that you will find alongside Baozhong, you will find something called Wenshan Baozhong. Now that is, if you will, the historical heartland of Baozhong, and if you purchase or sample a Wenshan Baozhong, you are getting the sort of most traditional variety. And in that case, it's not simply a matter of the processing, it also has to hail from Wenshan, and also very often, I'm not going to say almost exclusively because there's always room for experiment, but historically it would have used a different tea cultivar, Qingxin, which we're going to be looking at a lot more of on this channel. So what we have here is, so to speak, an analogue of Wenshan Baozhong. It's simply Baozhong, which in this case refers to the way the leaves are finished off and also the low oxidation. So it's a homage, it's an analogue of the more traditional and much more specific Wenshan Baozhong. So let's take a closer look at some of these leaves to show you the distinction from what we've seen from oolongs in the past, and then we'll move on to brewing the tea. See you in a moment. Hello and welcome to part 2 of our video. Just a very brief look at the tea leaves for our Baozhong, simply because they're very different to the rolled up leaves that we're used to from our other oolong reviews. You can see they're a lovely uniform green, a very dark green, very much lacking any of the more obvious signs of oxidation. I don't see any browning at all. The one thing I would like to point out, and this is how we see how much room the tea takes up in the top corner here, I've separated out a wee bit of stem and a leaf that's dried and withered around the stem. Let me just see if I can expand that a bit. That's one of the reasons why the tea is taking up so much room. not just for its own protection, so to speak, but also a lot of this material really hasn't either been rolled or compressed down. So that's all I wanted to do, show you these lovely dark green uniform leaves for Baozhong. Hello again and welcome back to part 3 of our video, where we are going to review this tea, brewing it in a Western style and in a Gongfu style. The Western style, as always, has already been brewed and the tea has been strained out. The tea leaves, I beg your pardon. So we have here, keeping it self-toasty, we've got some of our Baozhong. Now the parameters, the brewing parameters that we've used are effectively those of the vendor. It's 90 degrees centigrade for the water. We've taken the duration to 3.5 minutes. They recommended somewhere between 3 and 4 minutes. There was a little lack of clarity, at least when you were as twitchy as I am, in terms of how much tea. So looking at some other vendors of Baozhong, we've stuck to a standard 1 gram to 100 mils of water. So let's see what we've got. We've got our transparent jug for pouring the tea out, but also for examining it. For the Gongfu, we've got a lid, the gaiwan as a platter, and our gaiwan and the strainer, broad brimmed, which we're going to use just now. And let's see what this Baozhong, we don't really need that. Let's see what this Western style brewed Baozhong is like. Well, I can already tell you it's very, very pale. I brewed more of this tea than I thought I had. So there's no leaves to strain out there. It hasn't been brewing all this time. That is absolutely the colour. Very, very pale green yellow, very pale indeed. The smell, it's not a million miles away from a slightly more oxidized green oolong, but just slightly gentler. There's something definitely floral in there. And it's incredibly fresh. On the nose, slightly more of the floral on the cup, actually. It's definitely not a green tea. It is amazing how even 8% oxidation just transforms a green tea into something like that. On the other hand, it's got a certain, not astringency, and it hasn't been overbrewed, but there's a certain tanginess, shall we say, liveliness, that I think is some of the green tea characteristics that have only just been kept in check by that oxidation. Let's try a bit more. That said, it's lively and tangy, but it's still smooth. That is absolutely lovely. And if I had the time, I would simply finish that. But instead, we're going to pour that into our wastewater jug over here. And we're going to brew this tea Gongfu. For that, still 90 degrees centigrade, and we're using 6 grams of tea. And although you've seen it up close, that's what it looks like just handling it. Lovely green. Let's put that into our pre-warmed gaiwan. Now, unlike the rolled oolongs, this isn't going to need the prolonged first and or second steeping, which is there to allow the heat and the water to get into those rolled up leaves. This, I suspect, will start steeping immediately. So we're going to give this somewhere between 10 to 15 seconds right from the off. 100 mils, 90 degrees centigrade, 6 grams of tea. So that's 15. Yes, even at that first steeping, there is definitely colour there. Try not to spill stuff everywhere. There's a little bit of the vegetal notes of a green tea there, actually. It comes across more like a green tea, but with the edge taken off, but it's still a stronger colour as the Western brew. So let's see what that's like. So that's interesting, the green tea aspects are there, it seems to start with. Again, there's a great deal of floral coming off the cup. That's a sort of halfway house, flavour-wise, between what I expect from a green tea, something slightly savoury and something vegetal, and a green oolong. Very nicely balanced though, and again, very smooth. Now, one thing I've noticed is that these leaves are still, they're withered, so they're never going to, and slightly twisted, they're never going to unfurl the way, or at least as dramatically. 18 seconds for this. That's much more green oolong. It's almost buttery. It's like buttery vegetables, buttered greens, but sweeter. What I was going to say is that that first steep, sorry for the noise, although that first steep extracted flavour and colour, the leaves were still fairly dry, and that's still the case. I would say that, oh, that's slightly more green than the first one, or the Western. Yeah, much more green oolong coming out there. Freshness, obviously, but there's a lot of floral there. That might well be what Four Seasons, that particular cultivar, brings to the table. Yep. Sweet, actually a hint of fruit there. Green oolong with a slight crispness behind it. That's what it is. I should have given that longer, or used slightly less water. The flavour's dropping off quicker than I would expect. Let's go for a third steeping. I might push this much closer towards 25 seconds. See where that gets us. I doubt it'll overcook, but it always pays to be careful. Make sure I'm not putting in more than 100. There we go. So yes, I thought we would branch out into a style of tea today. Granted, in order to do so, we are looking at a particular cultivar. I'm not sure we've looked at Four Seasons before, but the emphasis really is here on style. And then I think the next time we're going to be looking at a couple of oolong cultivars, or Taiwanese cultivars, before we launch into our, oh, that's incredibly sweet, before we launch into our big series on the Qing Shin cultivar, which I'm going to call the Qing Shin Files. There's a lot of tea for that. Okay, let's give that a pour. That's fruity, actually. That one is, that's all three Fs, fresh, floral, and fruity. And that's really, really good. Colour-wise, more green. It's still quite pale, but I think that's more green than any of the others. Yeah. Slightly citrusy, green oolong. A lot of fruit on the cup. Starting to develop more body now. It's still slightly buttery, but the flavour isn't dropping off. I think it needed a longer steep. In fact, it might be worth taking a look to see what state these leaves are in. There's still plenty of give in them. They haven't gone as much as they're slightly steeped, or they're steeped. There's a lot more give in those. I might just give that a fourth brewing while we sum up, even if we don't get round to drinking it. So, what can we say about Baozhong? On our 3-point recommendation scale, it's very, very accessible. In its Wenshan form, or in this analog form of Baozhong, you can find it most vendors. Lots and lots and lots of vendors. It's a good introduction to the cultivar as well, although you can buy oolongs that simply say it's made with 4 seasons. So in that respect, it's very easy to get hold of. The taste is very approachable. I am surprised at how well that can steep. I was expecting it to be something like a green tea where you have to be very careful, but perhaps with that extra bit of oxidation or what the withering and twisting has done to the tea, it's still got a lot to give. And it's very easy to brew, both Western style and Gongfu. I would simply say, don't be afraid to push it a few seconds longer than you might expect. And it wouldn't surprise me if you could bump that up to 95 degrees and have much the same effect. So let's see what this final steeping is like. Now you might very quickly go over it. The 3 Fs, fresh, floral, fruity, plenty of sweetness. The colour, still pale yellowy green. Still some of that vegetal greenness, but kind of tempered by the oxidation. Slightly citrusy. Lots of fruit. So, hearty recommendation from me, 3 out of 3. All it remains for me to do is to say happy steeping and God bless.